It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you?
Glad to be back in Paris.
Glad you're back here on this side of the Atlantic. Glad to welcome back as well Matthew Dalton, Paris correspondent for The Wall Street Journal. How are you?
Pretty good, thanks. Glad it's Friday.
Glad it's Friday. Is Laure Mondeville glad it's Friday? Senior correspondent at Le Figaro.
Hi.
Are you glad it's Friday?
Well, I don't know. I'm working this weekend, so
It
doesn't make any difference.
Oh dear. We're rubbing salt in the wound. Leila Jacinto, senior editor at France24.com is with us as well. How are you?
DGIF, I see.
Okay, The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. After Thursday's fury and drama, now comes time for the vote. And it wasn't a trial, as was stated on Thursday, but part of a job interview for a lifetime appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court. We're talking about before Donald Trump's pick's turn. It was on Thursday. The turn of the woman who, as a 15-year-old, claimed she was sexually assaulted by a then 17-year-old drunken Brett Kavanaugh, as well as a friend.
Senator, or to
Indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two, and they're having fun at my expense.
You've never forgotten that laughter. You've never forgotten them laughing at you.
They were laughing with each other.
And you were the object of the laughter?
I was, underneath one of them while the two laughed. Two friends having a really good time with one another.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. This is a circus. The consequences will extend long past my nomination.
Kavanaugh added, Christopher Dickey, what goes around comes around.
Suggesting that he's going to be a vengeful Supreme Court justice, which is not very good news for the Supreme Court or for the United States. I mean, this is a very bitter process that we've just seen. Maybe people don't believe Christine Blasey Ford, but I think most people who listened to her thought she was very credible. And I know from the reporting that was coming out of the United States that there was feeling in the White House and there was a feeling among the Republicans that they were in big trouble. And then for some reason, they were encouraged by the truculent, whining, crying address of Brett Kavanaugh when he came out, just because he was throwing things out like, this is the revenge of the Clintons. The revenge of the Clintons? Sure, because he was part of the Starr investigation, because he was part of the Bush administration. But at the end of the day, this is not conduct becoming a Supreme Court justice at all. But it doesn't really matter to the Republicans. They just want the vote.
This was it seemed like he adopted or decided to adopt a very different strategy for rebutting the accusations against him. And I don't know if the White House or maybe Trump himself or others Republicans in Congress were counseling that, but he just came out very harsh, very aggressive. And you can argue about whether that was the right strategy for dealing with the accusations, but he or the White House had decided that it was no more Mr. Nice Guy for Brett Kavanaugh in dealing with the problem.
We discovered a different Brett Kavanaugh from the one that we saw at the beginning of the month.
It was completely different. And I think, as Christopher was saying, that it does raise questions about what his temperament is going to be like when he gets onto the Supreme Court. I think it harkens a bit back to the Clarence Thomas hearings and Anita Hill. And Clarence Thomas was a conservative justice with a very short record on the court, on the appeals court. But people have argued that the experience of the confirmation hearing and the battle over Anita Hill embittered him against the left. And since being on the court, he has been the most conservative justice consistently since then.
Yeah, it's been 27 years, and the world still remembers the all-male Senate panel that saw Anita Hill's testimony of workplace harassment. That didn't stop Clarence Thomas from being confirmed to the high bench, where, as Matthew was saying, he still serves today. And when you look back at those images and the fact that, well, it is a lifetime appointment we're talking about, Laure Mondeville, what are your thoughts, the impact of Thursday's testimony will have on more than just the two people that were being questioned, but the United States?
I think there is no doubt that what we have witnessed and watched, it was a riveting, I would say, psychodrama and, also political theater, but sort of, I would say, a blatant revelation of the huge political divide that we have in America. And I think that each part of American society saw this political event in a different light. And that's what is so striking about America at this moment. I think that a lot of people really felt for Dr. Ford. And I think a lot of people thought that she was probably credible and that something happened to her. But at the same time, I agree with Matthew that Brett Kavanaugh also came out very credible, because he was both extremely, as you said, punchy in his defense, and it was striking that the Republicans on the Senate had not wanted to be part of this whole questioning, and they had a prosecutor, and suddenly you have this guy who just comes into the fray and defends his name, his family, his honor, and he does it in a very forceful and emotional, political and emotional way, and he changes the game, which was absolutely striking. So I think that the other half of America is going to support him. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it will have far-reaching consequences. But it just aggravates a situation which is extremely unhealthy. I find that, the political stage in Washington, I call it the second Civil War.
Second Civil War.
Second Civil War. You have a civil war virtual for now, because people are not, I would say, hitting each other, in a violent way. But it's a very violent political stage when each part wants the other one to go down. The anti-Trump wants Trump to go down, and vice versa. And Brett Kavanaugh is part of this whole, I think, story.
I mean, I agree with Laura that, both of them truly believed their story. At issue is the fact that what is the truth, and of course it's become politicized, and this should at the very least be investigated. But I don't agree that things will fundamentally change, because unfortunately, this is the process of hiring Supreme Court judges. Every country has Supreme Court judges. I don't think that will ever change. I've had many discussions with my fellow American friends, and when you just point to the fact that, look, nobody hires their judges in this politicized way. They take you back to the Anita Hill. They'll take you back, they'll tell you that it was never this politicized. But the problem is the system, It
was always.
Other countries have retirement ages. The judges in the US, they are like African dictators. They die on the job. In some countries like India and Israel, it's other judges that vote the other judges. There are so many ways of doing this. And, this psychodrama happens. We will, we talk the same talking points. Everybody talks into their echo chamber. And fundamentally, the system, which every now and then comes up, is so politically fraught. I don't see that changing, because ultimately there's some sort of American exceptionalism, like this is how we work. But
actually, the stakes here are absolutely enormous. We are right on the verge of ceasing to be what we used to think of as the American government and becoming a Trump GOP regime. There are going to be no checks and balances once Kavanaugh is on the court. The only moment when a system can be stopped, when this juggernaut can be stopped, is actually coming up November 6th. If the House and Senate remain in Republican hands after that, for the next 2 years, Donald Trump, with all his authoritarian tendencies, will have nothing to stop him from exercising them. And I would say he won't only run in 2020.
But to Leela's point, is it gonna just come back again and again as long as you have lifetime appointments for these?
I don't think the problem is lifetime appointments on the Supreme Court. We have seen lifetime appointments all along. We've seen a lot of rotation of justices. It's been tilting a little bit this way, a little bit that way. We've had very conservative, we've had horrible Supreme Courts in the past, but we've also had very good ones and people who surprised us, like Justice Kennedy, the one whose resignation triggered this appointment.
But he did resign at a time where then the Supreme Court could tilt, and every time we run into the same thing. Now the Senate approval will hinge on 1 or 2 votes. The system is just
No, actually, many justices are approved
time,
almost unanimously.
Yeah, I mean, this has been this problem is relatively recent. It really, I mean, it became a huge issue with the nomination of Merrick Garland by President Obama.
Really, because some say you can trace it all the way back to when Robert Bork's nomination was voted down by the U.S. Senate, and that's nearly 3 decades ago.
Bork was given a vote in the Senate with Obama, and they voted against him. President Merrick Garland was not even, the Republicans who controlled the Senate at the time did not even allow a vote.
They didn't allow a hearing. They
didn't even allow a hearing. So I think that the overall problem is the fact that America's political system has become extremely polarized. Democrats will rarely cross the line, agree with Republicans. Republicans will rarely cross the aisle to agree with Democrats. And the fact is that in America, the president presents the nominee, and a different party can control the body that decides if they're approved or not. And so you can have this stalemate if there isn't trust across party lines. There's no trust across party lines. There's no agreement. America is completely polarized.
Is this a worldwide phenomenon, or is this an American problem?
I think it is. I mean, the polarization is absolutely, I think, at least a Western, phenomenon, and I find it very striking. After spending 8 years in the U.S. and now investigating all these popular revolt and changes in Europe, that I really find that you have the same kind of polarization and really a sort of a confrontation between the 2 camps. On the one hand, this what we call the elite, and on the other hand, the populist revolts. And it's exactly what is happening in Poland, in Hungary, in the Netherlands, in England with the Brexit, in France. And in Italy, we've seen, so we do have at the moment very polarized Western democracies. And that's why we have all these questions, if we don't find some kind of, middle ground and way out, recognize each other's right to say something and to have a say in what is happening on both sides.
There's more than just polarization in the West. There's polarization across the world. In India, for instance, deeply polarized. There's a Hindu right-wing party and an extremely polarized opposition. However, in this 1 week, we had 3 stories coming out of the Supreme Court. Decriminalization of adultery, legalization of gay sex, and women could go into this temple. Now, despite all the polarization over there, you still have a Supreme Court that works. And that is what the judiciary is all about. So yes, it is an extremely polarized
maybe it works
country.
if you favor those causes.
I would like to balance a bit, because I think you mentioned something like, a dictator, a banana dictatorship of the Supreme Court. I think one should not be exaggerating what is happening, because yes, we have this polarized process, and I think it was always like that, extremely frontal. And actually the Americans, sometimes they have short memory and they don't remember that decades ago they were actually, killing each other or, confronting each other in the street. And I think that when you look at the Supreme Court and the work of the Supreme Court, actually you see that all the judges, even if they are from conservative or liberal, inclination, they are actually very high standard, very high level individuals with a huge, in fact, very demanding, curriculum. And 80, I think I saw the statistics when I was in Washington, that 85% of the decisions are taken on a unanimous basis. So,
as you would expect judges to be on the Supreme Court to be qualified. So I am just talking about the process.
In other countries, the government and the legislature are controlled by the same political party. So if the government nominates a judge, they don't need the assent of their opposition to approve the judge. And so that's that's one way. Obviously, this would require a completely different political system in the U.S., but that's one way you get around the problem that the U.S. is facing right now, that they can't, that the process of nominating a Supreme Court judge
We're talking
is
as if there's checks and balances here, but there's no check. The Congress and the Senate and the House are supine before Trump. They do anything that Trump wants. Mm-hmm. I don't think this is really a question of the opposition that exists in Congress making it difficult for Trump to get things done. This was a debate. It was difficult. But
I was
really,
talking more about merit in the case of Merrick.
Well, okay. Well, that was a problem then, but that's all ancient history now.
Exactly. I mean, this is what voters voted for when they voted for President Trump. They voted for very conservative Supreme Court justices, and it seems like Brett Kavanaugh is going to be. It seems the odds are that he will be confirmed. Now, maybe they didn't vote for somebody who has been accused of sexual assault.
They don't care. All they care is he going to vote against Roe versus Wade? Is he going to overturn the legalization of abortion?
Let's talk about that. In the past 24 hours, the American Bar Association and also the magazine of the Jesuit Religious Order in the United States have withdrawn their endorsement for Judge Kavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court. Now, the Jesuit publication in its editorial says it very much wants the reversal of that 1973 decision to legalize abortion in the United States, but it also says Brett Kavanaugh's nomination is no longer in the best interest of the country. The hearings and the committee's deliberations are now also a bellwether of the way the country treats women when their reports of harassment, assault, and abuse threaten to derail the careers of powerful men. Your thoughts on this editorial from this Jesuit magazine?
Well, too late. And I really don't think, yes, it's welcome that an institution that does not have women rise up to the top has this position, but it's really not going to change anything. This committee that's meeting right now, we know exactly what they're going to do. In next week, probably it will go to the vote in the Senate. Everybody has hopes on 2 Republican female senators, but it is so politicized, and the system does not have checks and balances. And as you rightly said, people, when they were voting for Trump, they were actually telling reporters that it's the Supreme Court that they're watching, which means the system is just open for this politicization.
Sure. His constituents say, look, what is the Supreme Court going to be able to do now? It's already headed in this direction. It's a conservative court to begin with. But it has consistently, in recent years, ruled in favor of rich, powerful interests. And it's going to do that even more so. The question is, who's going to protect the vast majority of the people of the United States? Who's going to protect minorities? Who's going to protect the poor? Not the president, that's for sure, not the Republican Congress, and now not the Supreme Court. So it's going to be bad times in America.
News cycles go fast. Is there a chance that he won't be approved by the full Senate, Matthew Dalton?
Yeah, Susan Collins, senator from Maine, and Lisa Murkowski have both said publicly that they're weighing whether to vote for him. And so that you have to weigh that against the possibility that Democrats from some conservative Democrats will vote for him. But if all the Democrats hold the line and Murkowski and Collins vote against him, then he would not be approved by the Senate.
Because one of the issues too is that what he said and underlined, and I think you cannot avoid this is that the 4 people that Dr. Ford mentions are attending this supposed party in the summer of '82 have denied during integration with the they have denied being present or remembering anything of that kind.
But Laura, that's not what they did. They didn't deny it. They said they didn't remember it. And I thought that Christine Blasey Ford's response to that question, directed at that problem, was perfectly straightforward. They don't remember it because what happened to me did not happen to them. And I think if you look back on parties you went to as a teenager, if nothing momentous happened to you, sure you don't remember them. Sure you don't remember them. In fact, today, a little bit late, one of the senators brought out the famous calendar and said, look, this date, 1st of July, look at where he's going. He's going to have beers with a bunch of his friends. Isn't it? Of course, he doesn't say we're going to, try and rape a couple of girls while we're there. He doesn't put that on the calendar, which I'm sure his father was seeing. There was that whole weird thing about his father keeping a calendar. No, but it looks like a situation that you could investigate and you could verify what happened. You can't verify it, however, if the Republican investigators are the only people to question the relevant parties.
That's true, but as the Republicans also, underlined, the whole process was very politicized from the other side too, because they kept this
Well, this goes back to Merrick Garland. How can they possibly say it's politicized after they held up Merrick Garland for a year? How can they say it's politicized? Of course it's politicized.
I just wonder why they didn't decide, given the accusations, and after the accusations weren't going away, to find another justice who is also very conservative and who did not have this cloud hanging over them. And I think the answer to that is Brett Kavanaugh has very strong personal ties to the Republican establishment in Washington. He's worked in the White House. He's worked for Kenneth Starr. He knows Orrin Hatch very well. He knows a lot of the senators, particularly on the Judiciary Committee, very well personally. And they went to bat. They went to bat for him.
Which also speaks to him being a political hack from the beginning. I mean, if he's working for Kenneth Starr, if he's working in the White House and doing the kinds of jobs that he was doing before he was made a judge in, I think, 2005 or 2006 by George W. Bush, what was he doing in those places? Among other things, he was allegedly leaking information about, guess who? The Clintons. That's why he brought up the Clintons.
On the hashtag World This Week, they can kiss the midterms goodbye if they do confirm Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. It will tell the women of America that they don't matter, and what they say and what happens to them doesn't matter, and the male white establishment holds them in low esteem. Of course, that's not a given. That's
not a given either.
No,
I remember, in 2016 that it was absolutely sure that all women were going to vote for Clinton, and this, women's card was all on the Democrat side, and we've seen that it was not the case, and that, for instance, white women voted as a majority for Donald Trump, 52%, I think. So I think this is not. This is, of course, we don't know. Actually, we don't know if Dr. Ford shifted a significant part of the women's electorate to the Democrats or not. We don't know.
A lot of women feel really passionately about the abortion issue in an anti-abortion position, not pro-abortion, not pro-choice. And a lot of them will see Kavanaugh as a hero for standing up the way he did. They're putting their hopes on him to change the law. And I am sure that if we go out and talk to people in America, maybe outside of New York and D.C., we'll find lots of people who say, he stood up for us, he's going to go on the Supreme Court, and Donald Trump, he stood up for us. I don't care about all the things Donald Trump did. God wants this Supreme Court, and we want to end Roe versus Wade.
And I'm sure a lot of those women, or women outside of out of New York and D.C., don't know whether to believe Ms. Ford, don't know whether to believe Kavanaugh, are genuinely conflicted. I mean, in Judge Kavanaugh's defense, if you were wrongly accused of doing what he did, is said to have done, you'd be pretty angry about it too. So that would be certainly a plausible explanation of his performance.
We'll cross back to the Kavanaugh hearings if indeed we do get the full confirmation from the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's about Donald Trump shaping policy for decades when it comes to domestic policy. We also got to hear about his worldview this week, the annual opening of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, President of the United States attacking numerous UN bodies, defending the sovereignty of nations above all, and rating his own performance at one point.
Less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
Laure Mandeville.
Actually, it was pretty comical because, he showed his usual arrogance, and overstatements. So what he calls the hyperbole, but at the same time, he showed some sense of humor in the end, after people started laughing at the fact that he said it was the greatest, work ever.
There's also other points in that speech. Twice in the speech, he singles out Poland for praise. Yes. He criticizes Germany. Mm-hmm. The only time he criticized Russia was over Syria.
Mm-hmm. And gas, I think, veiled,
Germany.
I think what is striking is...
I don't even remember that he criticized Russia for Syria. What did he criticize them for?
He talked about the Russian-backed offensive of Assad, is what he talked about.
I think what is the most striking element of this speech, of course, is defense and illustration of the nation, and sovereignty, and the fact that America will never accept, that some kind of global institution could actually dictate what is going to happen in terms of migrations, in terms of anything. So it's a very striking contrast with Macron, who was using the word multilateralism all the time, and Trump was saying no, nation sovereignty, patriotism.
What did you think of Emmanuel Macron's performance after Donald Trump? You'll recall 1 year ago when the two were both new, Macron skipped his turn so he could furiously rewrite his speech. This time he came prepared and for a rebuttal to Trump. What impact will that speech have?
I thought that it was a very good speech, but Macron was not the only one who spoke for multilateralism. So did Theresa May. I mean, what is stunning about this performance, and I like this thought that you picked up, is that Donald Trump seemed to think that in a multilateral institution where he's speaking to heads of state and heads of government, that this is some sort of campaign speech, and he gives a speech against multilateralism to a multilateral body. So this was a wrong speech for the wrong audience, and it was just tremendously unsophisticated. I mean, he just showed himself to be insecure and hating the very institution that he's addressing. And there's really no need for a U.S. president to take this position. But then Trump is his own thing.
To borrow Laure Mondeville's adjective, is it just hyperbole? The whole thing? Just a show, or does this have lasting consequences, what's said at the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, it's unclear if it has lasting consequences. It's unclear if really anything much gets done at those meetings. But I think it is remarkable that the remark that Trump said of his administration getting more done than almost any other, maybe he allows, FDR and President Lincoln, getting more done in the first 2 years, but almost any other, it appeared to be that was on the teleprompter. So that was a very intentional remark. Often he makes the hyperbole comes in these extemporaneous musings when he goes off script. This seemed to be on the script, like that was something they really wanted to say. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, but the script was straight out of his stump speeches. Mm-hmm. It was straight out of his rallies. That's why, MAGA is not the same as UNGA. I mean, he couldn't get up in front of that audience credibly and expect that people would just sort of go, oh, yeah, sure. We believe all these lies you're telling us. When they laughed, basically, they were not just laughing at him. They were basically saying the emperor has no clothes. Mm-hmm. You can't justify any of the things you just said. It's not just the question of the administration being the most accomplished. It's also the things that it supposedly accomplished. There is no peace with North Korea. The economy is on a sugar high. If you run up $1 trillion debt, you can always make your economy look good in the short term. But everybody knows the danger that's being posed.
Right. And in fact, to the point of, what will this accomplish? I think it will accomplish exactly the opposite. Because the next day, the Iranian Prime Minister Rouhani had a press conference. He seemed perfectly happy with the way things were going at the UN. If nothing else, Trump seems to coalesce the international sense, apart from, of course, Saudi Arabia and Israel, to stick with the Iran nuclear deal, which is, and Iran, of course, is his big boogie right now. So I think it does quite the reverse.
All right, we mentioned Emmanuel Macron at the UN. France's president was asked about Trump's worldview, as you know. He was also asked about his predecessor's claim that India insisted that the French choose as local partners for the 2016 sale of 36 Rafale fighter jets the Reliance company of billionaire businessman Anil Ambani. that's triggered protests in the streets of Delhi, Mumbai, and elsewhere. Ambani, who had no prior experience in aviation but does enjoy close ties with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. François Hollande's comments last week come as Reliance denies providing financing for a movie produced by Hollande's partner, Julie Gaillet. Here's what Emmanuel Macron had to say at the UN.
I will be very clear. It was a government-to-government discussion. And I just want to refer to what Prime Minister Modi very clearly said a few days ago. And I have any other comment to say. I was not in charge at that time, but I know that we have very clear rules. And this is a government-to-government discussion.
A government-to-government. It didn't happen on my watch. Sitting in the front row, though, when he was speaking, was the foreign minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, who at the time in 2016 was the defense minister.
Yes, I mean, Macron did not answer that question. And this is really a huge issue in India. Yes, it's true that this deal was signed very hurriedly by Hollande, his predecessor. Now, you know, as far as the Indian opposition, the Congress and their supporters, they have absolutely no doubt that the partner in this intergovernmental deal was in fact supplied by the ruling BJP party. But what strikes me is that a lot of my colleagues in India want to know what is happening about this story in France. And in France, it's just not a story, because the idea of arms deals and corruption and kickback in France is on a colossal scale. We've had Angola Gate, Karachi Gate, some of these people get actually tried, then they get pardoned. So in terms of arms sales, what was the French government, negotiating for a French company and accepting a partner? It's there's corruption everywhere.
Laure Mondeville, how much coverage has this story gotten in Le Figaro?
Le Figaro is actually owned by Dassault. So I would rather,
which makes Rafale fighter jets.
That I would rather, I don't know actually
You can recuse yourself.
I'm recusing myself on this issue actually, that I don't know well.
Matthew Dalton, are you surprised at the fact that, I mean, it's true that viewers in India have been asking us, when are we going to do a full show on this? How much interest is there? And it's just not playing much on the radio or on TV or in newspapers.
Yeah, I guess there's a certain cynicism around arms deals, between any Western country, big arms supplier, and their customers abroad. I think it's worth noting that there is a reason why India tries to get a local partner involved, or at least a stated reason, which is that they want to acquire explicitly some kind of technical know-how related to the jets, the technology. They don't want to just be consumers. They also, at some point in the future, want to be able to do the thing themselves. Now, how this particular company got involved and what they actually are going to be getting, other than money, is to be determined.
Why did Hollande speak to that investigative news site Mediapart? I mean, it's just drawing attention to this whole business regarding his partner, Julie Gaillet.
Good question. Listen, let's be, to be objective. The Reliance Group owns way too much. If you are a film producer and looking for an Indian partner, quite likely it's going to be someone linked to the Reliance Group. That is the whole problem with the Ambani Group. They own media. They succeed in stifling, or at least trying to stifle, the free press. So yes, if Julie Gaillet was trying to make a film with Indian partners, quite likely it would be somehow related to the Reliance Group. But what you say about having defense know-how, that's very much part of India's interest, except that this deal doesn't give that. There's a company called the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, which is the military aviation company, which did not get this contract. Instead, some businessman who has failed in all his operations gets this contract. So that's the problem.
Well, also, there's a historical problem selling Rafales. They're not exactly the plane that everybody wants as a warplane.
But yes, but just to give it some French context, this deal was done by Hollande in 2015, right around the time when Obama was in the White House, and the Saudis, Qataris, Egyptians were extremely unhappy with Obama's tilt to Iran, and Hollande and the Rafale had a good season. Yeah. So that's when the deal was struck, and then of course later on
we saw what happened. Remember that interview earlier this month on Russian broadcaster RT after the UK distributed images of two men it alleges carried out the poisoning of former spy Sergei Skirpal and his daughter in Salisbury? The one where they claimed that they were tourists who went to visit the cathedral and its world-famous clock? Well, now intelligence consultants Bellingcat claim that the one whose passport name was Ruslan Boshirov is in fact Colonel Anatoly Chepiga, an officer of the intelligence services once decorated by Vladimir Putin. Respected Russian daily newspaper Kommersant went to Chepiga's hometown of Berezovska in the far eastern Amur region, where residents did identify him as one of the two men in the RT interview. But somehow that's not fazing the Kremlin.
Listen, many people look alike, but I cannot tell you who this citizen who was pointed out in this investigation is, because I don't have such information.
Could be mistaken identity, Christopher.
Could be. Could be. I mean, Bellingcat, they do a good job, and Kommersant, they did a good job, but, people do look alike. Yeah, bald guys with beards, you see them everywhere.
It's for once though the plausible deniability.
Look, the Kremlin. It's so funny with the Kremlin because they want plausible deniability, but they want you to know they did it too. There's in Luke Harding's book about the Russian conspiracy against the United States. One of the first things he tells is the story about how the old KGB agents, they'd go in and search your house and they'd put out a cigarette on the floor. They'd leave a turd floating in the toilet just to remind you that they were there. Well, we see this on a global stage with Putin. He leaves traces everywhere. We know what he's doing. He knows we know what he's doing. And he's like, screw you. You can't do anything about it.
It's either that or just incompetence. I can't decide which, because I'm not an espionage expert, but from watching like TV shows and reading spy novels, if you have a deep cover assassin, those documents relating to his identity shouldn't be, floating around the internet somewhere, like the way Bellingcat seems to have uncovered them, if this is in fact him. So maybe this is their way of leaving, a signature on the whole thing. But it is pretty remarkable.
I agree that it's one of the two, but it could be both at the same time. Yeah. That it could be incompetence at the beginning, then cover up. Because what is striking is that the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin himself doesn't have any problem in lying when it's already clear that these guys were from the military intelligence, and you have this guy Anatoly Chepiga. They know about him and they spotted him because he was decorated. He received in 2014 a very high decoration for service to the country. There was no explanation why, but everyone thinks that because he was in Ukraine, because the only military operation taking place at that time was Eastern Ukraine. So it's clear that even if it was not deliberate, attempt to say we don't care, we do whatever we want, we come on foreign territory. It's also anyway, we're going to deny, but that it's what it is. It's okay.
We're going to use a poison that's only known to be developed by the Soviet Union, for starters. Or we're going to kill Litvinenko with polonium-210, which is only found in very, very few locations, mainly the old Soviet Union and Russia. To do that is to just sign a card and say it.
But
everything else is just
Litvinenko
game
case,
playing.
actually, they didn't expect that it would be known. Actually. That's what the
Maybe.
doctors actually learned about it. Absolutely.
I think
I think the question here is not so much what and how badly the Russians did it. I think it's answers from the British side. The fact that Anthony Chepiga used this name consistently, and then got a business visa. And in fact, one of the reporters of Bellingcat said that next week they are actually going to have a story on how Anthony Chapika got a business visa and came to the UK when it should have been very easy to uncover that in fact he did not have any businesses. So more interesting. Russia does a ham job. We know that, but how did this happen, and what happened on the British side? That's going to be
something that we'll have to watch for. We're going to have to leave it there.